Les Mesirables. By Victor Hugo.
Jean Valjean was born of a peasant family. Uneducated and with no special skill, he did whatever work come his way to help out a sister who had 7 children. One night, when the family had nothing to eat, he stole bread from a shop. He was caught and sentenced to 5 years in the galleys.
Near the end of his 4th year, he was helped by his fellow inmates to escape. He was retaken and his sentence was extended to 3 years. He made 3 more unsuccessful attempts and each time, more years were added to the original sentence until he had to serve a total of 19 years. While in the galleys it was apparent that, in physical strength, he far surpassed all other inmates of the prison. His strength was equal to that of 4 men, a quality that made him easily recognizable. He talked little and never laughed. From year to year his soul had withered more and more. Jean Valjean entered the galleys a frightened youth. He came out a hardened man, condemning society, sentencing it to his hatred, for in his mind, it was society which was responsible for the doom he had undergone. At last, after 19 years of torture and slavery, he was set free. On his way home village, he entered a town and looked for lodging. But at every place he went to, he was turned away, for it had become known that he was Jean Valjean, former convict and galley slave, and therefore dangerous. In desperation, he went to the town prison, but the guard would not let him in. He tried a dog kennel, but even the dog did not want him. At last, he came to a stone bench in front of a church. He lay down on the bench. Just then an old woman came out of the church, told Jean Valjean to knock there. He did as he was told and was astonished when, after telling the bishop about his past, he was bidden to eat with the men from silver plates. He was also given a clean, soft bed to sleep in and was even called Monsieur. Monsieur to a convict is a glass of water to a man dying of thirst for respect. As the cathedral clock struck 2, Jean Valjean awoke. What awakened him was, too good a bed. For nearly 20 years, he has not slept in a bed, and, although he had not undressed, the sensation was too novel not to disturb his sleep. He had slept something more than 4 hours. His fatigue had passed away. He was not accustomed to give many hours to repose. He could not get asleep again, and so he began to think. Those 6 silver plates took possession of him. There they were, within a few steps. His mind wavered a whole hour, and a long one, in fluctuation and in struggle. The clock struck 3. He opened his eyes, rose up hastily in bed, reached out his arm and felt for his haversack, which he had put into the corner of the alcove. Then he thrust out his legs and placed his feet on the ground, and found himself, he knew not how, seated on his bed. All was still in the house. With stealthy steps, he moved towards the door of the next room, which was the bishop's, as we know. On reaching the door, he found it unlatched. The bishop had closed it. He took 1 step and was in the room. A deep calm filled the chamber. Here and there indistinct, confused forms could be distinguished, which by day, were papers scattered over a table, open folios, books piled on a stool, an armchair with clothes on it, a prie-dieu, but now were only dark corners and whitish spots. Jean Valjean advances, fully avoiding furniture. At the farther end of the room he could hear the equal and quiet breathing of the sleeping bishop. He did not remove his eyes from the old man. The only thing which was plain from his attitude and his countenance was a strange indecision. You would have said he was hesitated between 2 realms, that of the doomed and that of the saved. He appeared ready either to cleave this skull, or to kiss this hand. In a few moments he raised his left hand slowly to his forehead and took off his hat, then, letting his hand fall with the same slowness, Jean Valjean resumed his contemplations, his cap in his left hand, his club in his right, and his hair bristling on his fierce-looking head. Under his frightful gaze the bishop still slept in profound peace. The crucifix above the mantelpiece was dimly visible in the moonlight, apparently extending its arms towards both, with a benediction for one and a pardon for the other. Suddenly Jean Valjean put on his cap, then passed quickly without looking at the bishop, along the bed, straight to the cupboard which he perceived near its head. He raised the drill to force the lock, the key was in it, he opened it. The first thing he saw was the basket of silver. He took it, crossed the room with hasty strides, careless of noise, reached the door, entered the oratory, took his stick, stepped out, put the silver in his knapsack, threw away the basket, ran across the garden, leaped over the wall like a tiger, and fled. The next day at sunrise, Monseigneur Bienvenu was walking in the garden. Madame Magloire ran towards him quite beside herself. "Monseigneur, Monseigneur," cried she, "does your greatness know where the silver basket is?" "Yes," said the bishop. "God be praised," said she. "I did not know what had become of it." The bishop had just found the basket on a flower bed. He gave it to Madame Magloire and said, "There it is." "Yes," said she, "but there is nothing in it." "The silver?" "Ah," said the bishop, "it is the silver then that troubles you. I do not know where that is." "Good heavens! It is stolen. That man who came last night stole it." And in the twinkling of an eye, with all the agility of which her age was capable, Madame Magloire ran to the oratory, went into the alcove, and came back to the bishop. The bishop was bending with some sadness over a cochlearia des Guilins, which the basket had broken in falling. He looked up at Madame Magloire's cry, "Monseigneur, the man has gone. The silver is stolen." While she was uttering this exclamation, her eyes fell on an angle of the garden where she saw traces of an escalade. A capstone of the wall had been thrown down.
"See, there's where he got out. He jumped into Cocky Filet Lane. The abominable fellow! He has stolen our silver." The bishop was silent for a moment, then raising his eyes, he said mildly to Madame Magloire, "Now first, did the silver belong to us?" Madame Magloire did not answer. After a moment the bishop continued, "Madame Magloire, I have for a long time wrongfully withheld this silver. It belonged to the poor." "Who is the man?" "A poor man evidently." In a few minutes he was breakfasting at the same table at which Jean Valjean sat the night before. While breakfasting, Monseigneur Bienvenu pleasantly remarked to his sister, who said nothing, and Madame Magloire, who was grumbling to herself, that there was really no need even of a wooden spoon or fork to dip a piece of bread into a cup of milk. Just as the brother and sister were rising from the table, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said the bishop. The door opened. A strange, fierce group appeared on the threshold. 3 men were holding a fourth by the collar. The 3 men were gendarmes, the fourth, Jean Valjean. A brigadier of gendarmes, who appeared to head the group, was near the door. He advanced towards the bishop, giving the military salute. "Monseigneur," said he. At this word, Jean Valjean, who was sullen and seemed entire cast down, raised his head with a stupefied air. "Monseigneur," he murmured, "then it is not the cure." "Silence," said a gendarme, "it is Monseigneur, the bishop." In the meantime, Monseigneur Bienvenu had approached as quickly as his great age permitted. "Ah, there you are," said he, looking towards Jean Valjean. "I am glad to see you. But I gave the candlesticks also, which are silver like the rest, and would bring 200 francs. Why did you not take them along with your plates?" Jean Valjean opened his eyes and looked at the bishop with an expression which no human tongue could describe. "Monseigneur," said the brigadier, "then what this man said was true? We met him. He was going like a man who was running away, and we arrested him in order to see. He had this silver." "And he told you," interrupted the bishop, with a smile, "that it had been given him by a good old priest with whom he had passed the night. I see it all. And you brought him back here? It is all a mistake." "If that is so," said the brigadier, "we can let him go." "Certainly," replied the bishop. The gendarmes released Jean Valjean, who shrank back. "Is it true they let me go?" he said in a voice almost inarticulate, as if he were speaking in his sleep. "My friend," said the bishop, "before you go away, here are your candlesticks, take them." He went to the mantelpiece, took the 2 candlesticks, and brought them to Jean Valjean. The two women beheld the action without a word, or gesture, or a look, that might disturb the bishop. Jean Valjean was trembling in every limb. He took the two candlesticks mechanically, and with a wild appearance. "Now," said the bishop, "go in peace." Then turning to the gendarmes, he said, "Messieurs, you can retire." The gendarmes withdrew. Jean Valjean felt like a man who was just about to faint. The bishop approached him, and said, in a low voice, "Forget not, never forget that you have promised me to use this silver to become an honest man." Jean Valjean, who had no recollection of this promise, stood confounded. The bishop had laid much stress upon these words as he uttered them. He continued, solemnly, "Jean Valjean, my brother, you belong no longer to evil, but to good. It is your soul that I am buying for you. I withdraw it from dark thoughts and from the spirit of perdition, and I give it to God." Jean Valjean went out of the city as if he were escaping. He made all haste to get into the open country, taking the first lanes and bypaths that offered, without noticing that he was every moment retracing his steps. He wandered thus all morning. He had eaten nothing, but he felt no hunger. He was the prey of a multitude of sensations.